The woman laughed as she tore the waitress's dress in front of everyone, but her husband's next words made the whole ballroom go silent. The Heart Foundation Charity Gala shimmered beneath 1,000 lights. Crystal chandeliers reflected. In champagne glasses, soft jazz played through golden speakers, and the air smelled of perfume and wealth. It was a night meant for luxury, not cruelty. Evelyn Hart glided through the room like she owned the air itself. Her diamond necklace caught the light with every calculated step. Guests parted when she passed, whispering admiration wrapped in fear. To her, power wasn't something earned. It was something displayed. Across the ballroom, Amara Cole adjusted a row of wine glasses near the head table, her movements calm and careful. She wore a sleek black gown that shimmered subtly under the lights, elegant but understated. She smiled at the servers, whispering a quiet thank you as they passed. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "You missed a spot, sweetheart," she called out, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Amara turned, offering a polite nod. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll fix it." But before she could move, Evelyn stepped forward, her red nails catching the silk of Amara's gown. "Rip!" The sound sliced through the music. Gasps erupted from nearby tables. The fabric tore from Amara's waist to her hip, revealing the pale shimmer of the underslip. Evelyn smirked, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "She shouldn't wear something she can't afford," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The laughter that followed wasn't full. It was nervous, unsure, the kind of sound that hides guilt behind pretense. Amara stood frozen, her breath shallow, the humiliation burning through her chest. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward her, some pitying, some gleeful, none brave enough to intervene. A waiter fumbled a tray nearby. The band stopped mid-song. Even the chandeliers seemed to flicker. Then, from across the room, a man's voice cut through the silence. "Evelyn." The tone wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of weight that silenced entire rooms. Daniel Hart, billionaire entrepreneur and Evelyn's husband, stood near the stage. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, cold and sharp, locked onto his wife. Slowly, he set down his champagne glass and walked toward the two women. Evelyn's smirk faltered. "Darling, I was just—" But Daniel's gaze never left Amara. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as he stopped in front of her, taking in the torn gown, the trembling composure, the quiet dignity that refused to break. The air was electric, charged with the kind of tension that comes before truth detonates. They thought she was just a waitress. In 60 seconds, they'd learn who really owned the room. Amara Cole had never belonged to glittering rooms like this. Not at first. She had spent her teenage years serving wine and clearing plates at the very kinds of events she now attended as a guest. At 28, she was the founder of the Cole Cultural Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting young minority designers who could not afford exposure in a world ruled by wealth and connections. The gown she wore that night was her own creation, hand-stitched, every bead sewn with patience and pride. It wasn't about showing off. It was a quiet statement that she had built her place in this world, thread by thread, through talent, not privilege. Her invitation to the gala had not come from the Harts themselves, but from the event sponsors who admired her foundation's work. They believed her presence would inspire the next generation of designers. To everyone else, however, Amara simply looked like a guest who didn't fit the mold. Too young, too composed, too unfamiliar. And to someone like Evelyn Hart, that made her a target. Evelyn was the picture of high society. Diamond earrings, designer gown, and a reputation that mixed glamour with intimidation. She ruled social circles the way a queen rules her court, with smiles that hid daggers. Beneath the glitter, though, there was insecurity. Her husband, Daniel Hart, was a self-made billionaire, a man who had built his empire on technology and principles, not lineage. Evelyn, on the other hand, had inherited her wealth but not her purpose. Every new face that drew admiration in a room she considered hers felt like a personal threat. Daniel was everything she wasn't, calm, private, and quietly moral. He disliked vanity, avoided gossip, and valued humility in others more than grandeur in himself. To him, tonight's charity gala wasn't about display. It was about impact. He'd agreed to sponsor the event because it funded programs for young artists and designers, people like Amara. But Daniel didn't know that Amara was there. Not yet. Earlier that evening, as Amara prepared, she thought of her grandmother, who had raised her after her mother passed. Her grandmother's words were stitched into her memory as clearly as the hemline of her dress. Glass isn't stitched in fabric, it's stitched in grace. Those words had carried her through years of double shifts, through insults whispered by customers who assumed her worth ended at her uniform. The irony wasn't lost on her, that she now stood in the same kind of ballroom where she used to serve. The chandeliers that once hung over her head now reflected off her handmade gown. But even as success wrapped around her like soft silk, she remained humble. She didn't crave validation from people like Evelyn Hart. She only wanted to make her grandmother proud. Evelyn, however, noticed her the moment she stepped in. Amara's elegance wasn't the kind that shouted. It was quiet, effortless, the kind of beauty that makes people wonder about the story behind it. To Evelyn, that subtle confidence was infuriating. She leaned toward a friend and whispered, "Who invited the help?" The friend shrugged, uneasy but silent. Evelyn's smirk widened. As the night went on, Amara mingled politely, answering questions about her work, her foundation, and her designs. Some guests recognized her name. Others assumed she was a server who had wandered too close to the spotlight. She didn't correct them. She never needed to. Daniel had noticed her once or twice across the room. There was something familiar in her calmness, something genuine. But before he could approach, Evelyn's jealousy flared, the sound of compliments directed toward Amara. "Her dress is stunning. Isn't she the designer from that cultural program?" Grated against her pride. She couldn't stand the idea of another woman drawing admiration in a room she ruled. When Evelyn saw Amara near the head table adjusting the glasses, she made her move. To her, humiliation was sport, an easy way to remind everyone of their place. She didn't realize the woman she was about to ridicule wasn't a server, but the guest of honor hidden in plain sight. Amara felt the tension before it happened. She had learned to sense disdain. It was always in the tone, the narrowed gaze, the false sweetness before the cruelty struck, but she kept her composure. As she brushed her hands over the fabric of her own creation, she thought again of her grandmother's final words before she passed. "When they test your worth, let silence be your mirror, and truth your answer." Those words became her armor that night, because she didn't know it yet. But before the evening ended, her silence would reflect every lie in that room, and truth would speak louder than all their laughter combined. Amara arrived at the gala an hour before the first guests stepped through the golden double doors. The ballroom was still a hive of quiet preparation, servers aligning glasses, florists adjusting centerpieces, photographers testing flashes against the crystal chandeliers. She liked arriving early. It gave her time to breathe, to observe, and to make sure every detail honored the young designers her foundation represented. She checked the seating cards herself, ensuring the names of scholarship recipients were correctly placed beside donors who might mentor them. When she noticed a few staff struggling to arrange table settings, she knelt down and began helping. "Forks on the left, glasses to the right." "Yes, that's perfect," she said with a warm smile. A few waiters exchanged surprised glances. To them, she looked like someone in charge, not a guest. But when the catering manager walked in, she frowned. "Miss, please stay clear of the service area." Amara smiled gently. "Of course. I just wanted to make sure the placements looked balanced." The woman paused, realizing her mistake, but Amara simply continued adjusting one final card and nodded politely. She never corrected anyone harshly. She knew kindness often disarmed judgment faster than pride ever could. From across the ballroom, Evelyn Hart stood near the bar, watching, her lips curved in disdain. Who does she think she is? Giving orders? Like that? Acting like she runs the place? She whispered to her friend Veronica, who offered a nervous chuckle. Evelyn's insecurities stirred. She didn't recognize the face, the name, or the presence, and that made her uneasy. When the guests finally began to arrive, the air, filled with laughter, flash photography, and the sweet melody of a string quartet. Amara found her assigned seat near the sponsor's table but stood to help a few late arrivals find theirs. She was polite, efficient, unassuming, and that only made Evelyn more irritated. By the time dinner was served, the tension was palpable. Evelyn sat at the head table beside Daniel, smiling for cameras, yet her gaze kept drifting to where Amara sat among a small group of young designers. Their conversation was soft, genuine, the kind Evelyn hadn't heard in years. Laughter without pretense, warmth without motive. Then came the champagne. Evelyn excused herself from her seat and glided toward Amara's table with a practiced smile that fooled no one. "I just wanted to welcome you properly," she said, lifting a glass. "It's so inspiring to see passion from all backgrounds." Her words carried sugar and venom in equal measure. Amara rose slightly, ready to thank her when Evelyn's hand slipped. The champagne spilled down the front of Amara's gown, golden liquid soaking into the fabric she had hand-stitched herself. Gasps rippled through the table. Evelyn feigned shock. "Oh dear, I'm so clumsy. I hope it wasn't too expensive." Her tone was light, but her eyes gleamed. Amara took a slow breath, steadying her trembling hands. "It's all right," she said softly. "It can be cleaned." Evelyn smirked, turning to the others. "Some people never learn their place, do they?" The words landed like a slap. The laughter that followed was thin, forced. Even those who laughed did it out of fear, not amusement. A few guests exchanged looks uncomfortable. The musicians hesitated before resuming the next song. Across the room, Daniel had been mid-conversation when he heard his wife's voice. He turned, brows tightening as he watched the exchange unfold. His assistant leaned closer. "Sir." "That's Amara Cole," Daniel frowned. "Who?" "The philanthropist," the assistant whispered. "The one funding tonight's scholarships. She's the reason this gala hit record donations." Daniel's expression shifted instantly. "You're certain?" "Yes, sir." "That's her." He leaned back in his chair, watching in silence. The realization struck him like cold water. His wife wasn't just being cruel, she was humiliating one of the event's key sponsors. Evelyn, meanwhile, strutted back to her seat, pleased with herself. But the energy in the room had changed. Conversations grew hushed. Cameras subtly tilted in her direction. Amara excused herself to the restroom, her face composed but pale. Inside, she dabbed her dress gently with a napkin, whispering to herself the words her grandmother used to say, "Grace under fire. Amara, grace under fire." She looked at her reflection, the soaked fabric, the red mark where Evelyn had grabbed her arm earlier, and exhaled. "You've been here before," she reminded herself. "You just look different now." When she returned to the table, a soft murmur passed through the crowd. Guests now recognized her, not as staff, but from the program brochures that listed her foundation as a platinum donor. The whisper spread like a current. "That's her. That's Amara Cole." Daniel's assistant approached him again, whispering something further, something that made his jaw tighten. Evelyn noticed the change in his demeanor, but she misread it. She thought it was sympathy. She didn't realize it was disappointment. As the evening continued, Daniel stayed silent, watching both women closely. Every time Evelyn laughed, his eyes darkened. Every time Amara smiled through the discomfort, his respect for her deepened. The crowd could feel the shift, an invisible weight pressing against the room. One guest, a soft-spoken designer seated near the back, leaned toward her companion and muttered under her breath, "That woman's about to embarrass the wrong person." And though the music played and laughter resumed, there was a tension in the air, a storm gathering just beyond the chandeliers. Every cruel glance, every whispered insult was another spark waiting to ignite. Evelyn didn't know it yet, but her cruelty had just set the stage for her own undoing, and the woman she thought she humiliated was about to command the room in a way money never could. The dinner was nearly over when Evelyn decided that embarrassment once wasn't enough. The champagne incident had not satisfied her completely. She wanted dominance, the kind that left people remembering her control. The orchestra slowed into a soft melody while waiters cleared plates. Daniel sat at the head of the table, distracted, his phone buzzing with messages from reporters covering the charity. Evelyn leaned close to him, whispering, "I'm going to thank our guests." He nodded absently, not realizing what she was about to do. Rising gracefully, she tapped her glass with a spoon. The gentle ring echoed through the ballroom. "A toast," she announced, "to generosity, elegance, and knowing one's place in the world." Polite applause followed, the kind people give before they know where a speech is headed. Evelyn smiled broadly, her eyes searching for Amara, who was seated 3 tables away. "Oh, and come here, darling," she said sweetly, waving her hand. "You've worked so hard tonight. Let us thank you properly." Amara hesitated. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Part of her wanted to refuse, to stay seated and avoid another spectacle, but she saw Daniel's puzzled glance and rose quietly. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached the stage. When she stood before Evelyn, the contrast between them was striking, one glittering in diamonds, the other radiant in grace. Evelyn reached out, pretending to fix Amara's collar. "You really do have such a pretty dress," she said, her tone syrupy. "Where did you get it?" "Oh, wait." And before Amara could step back, rip. The sound was unmistakable. The delicate seam split down the shoulder, the fabric giving way. The entire room gasped as if the air had been pulled from their lungs. For a moment, Amara couldn't move. Her body went cold. The humiliation struck hard, sharper than the rip itself. Flashbulbs flickered. A reporter's camera caught the scene. Her hand instinctively reached to hold the torn fabric together. Evelyn's laughter broke the silence like glass. "Relax, darling," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You can sew it later, assuming you can afford thread." The cruelty in her voice sent murmurs through the crowd. Guests exchanged horrified glances. Some whispered. Others looked away, unwilling to be part of the moment but too cowardly to intervene. And then, everything stopped. Daniel rose from his chair. The scrape of his chair legs against the marble echoed louder than any music. Evelyn turned toward him, her laughter faltering. Daniel's expression was unlike anything she had ever seen. Calm, controlled, but carrying the weight of thunder behind it. "That's enough, Evelyn." The ballroom froze. The waiters stopped mid-step. Even the orchestra went silent. He walked toward the stage slowly, his shoes tapping against the floor like a countdown. Evelyn tried to smile. "Darling, I was just—" But Daniel didn't look at her. He stepped directly beside Amara, removing his tailored jacket and gently draping it over her torn shoulder. His voice was low, steady. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his gaze sweeping the room, "allow me to introduce someone truly worth applauding, Amara Cole." A ripple moved through the guests. "She's not a waitress," Daniel continued. "She's the designer behind the collection this charity is celebrating. Tonight, the same woman whose foundation donated $500,000 to make this event possible." The silence that followed was suffocating. You could hear the distant hum of cameras beginning to whirl. Reporters scrambled for position. Evelyn's color drained, her perfectly powdered face turning pale beneath the lights. Amara blinked, still processing the sudden shift. The pity in people's eyes had turned to awe. The woman who had been mocked seconds ago now stood at the center of admiration. Daniel's words were clear and deliberate. "She represents everything this evening was meant to honor: talent, perseverance, and dignity." He turned slightly toward Amara. "And tonight, I apologize to you on behalf of this event, and on behalf of anyone who ever mistook grace for servitude." Evelyn tried to interject, her voice trembling. "Daniel, please, it was just a misunderstanding." He cut her off sharply. "No, it was arrogance." The crowd erupted into applause, not hesitant this time, but thunderous. The kind that shakes a room with truth. Reporters raised their cameras. Phones recorded the moment from every angle. Evelyn lowered her eyes, unable to look at anyone. Amara took a breath. For a moment she considered staying silent, but then she remembered her grandmother's words. "Let silence be your mirror, and truth your answer." She turned slightly, addressing the audience in a voice calm and steady. "I used to serve tables in rooms like this," she began, "and I learned something back then. You don't need money to have class. You just need kindness." Her words resonated like a hymn. Even those at the farthest corners of the room fell silent. Daniel nodded. "And my wife," he said quietly but firmly, "just taught us what money without kindness looks like." The applause swelled again, louder, rolling through the chandeliers like a tide. Evelyn covered her face with one hand, trembling. realizing that every camera lens in the room was pointed not at her diamonds, but at her disgrace. Amara turned toward her gently, not with anger, but with finality. "You ripped my dress to shame me," she said softly, every word clear. "But all you did was reveal what you're made of." Evelyn couldn't respond. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The same crowd that once fawned over her now looked away in discomfort. As the photographer's flashes burst around them, Daniel remained at Amara's side, the jacket still around her shoulders. The power in the room had shifted entirely. The woman who had entered as a target of mockery now stood as the symbol of grace, and the one who had wielded power was left, small and silent under the weight of her own cruelty. When the applause finally died down, Daniel turned to Amara once more and said quietly, "You shouldn't have to defend yourself from people like that. The world should be thanking you." Amara met his gaze, her composure unbroken. "It's enough," she said softly. "Kindness will finish what cruelty starts." And with that, she walked off the stage, head high, leaving Evelyn standing amid her own shattered image. The cameras caught everything: the rip, the reveal, and the reckoning. The story would travel far beyond that ballroom. But in that moment, no one needed headlines to understand what had happened. They had all witnessed something rare: grace defeating arrogance and truth restoring dignity in the most silent, powerful way imaginable. By morning, the gala's glitter had turned to gossip. Every major news outlet had the same headline splashed across its front page: "Black designer humiliated," then "vindicated by billionaire's speech." Clips of the confrontation spread across social media like wildfire. One video alone, showing Daniel placing his jacket over Amara's torn gown, hit 10 million views in 24 hours. Comment sections overflowed with outrage and admiration. Her composure was everything. She didn't even raise her voice. That's power. Evelyn Hart just ended her own career in 30 seconds. Amara's inbox flooded with messages from fashion houses, journalists, and young designers who said her grace gave them hope. Overnight, her foundation, the Cole Cultural Initiative, received record-breaking donations. Designers from around the world offered to collaborate. One Parisian label even requested to feature her handmade gown, the very one Evelyn had ripped, as the centerpiece for a campaign titled "Strength in Stitching." Meanwhile, Evelyn's world crumbled. Sponsors began distancing themselves within hours of the clip going viral. Several charities she chaired quietly removed her name from upcoming events. Tabloids published scathing exposés about her history of elitist behavior. Waitstaff accounts, ex-employees, even a former friend who recalled how Evelyn mocked her accent at a fundraiser. The same society pages that once praised her elegance now questioned her character. She tried to issue an apology through a publicist, but it rang hollow. Every word felt rehearsed. The internet had already decided. She wasn't misunderstood. She was exposed. Daniel, however, did not stay silent. In a televised statement the following week, he addressed the incident directly. Standing at a podium with the foundation's logo behind him, he said, "What happened at the Hart Foundation Gala was unacceptable, not because it went viral, but because it ever happened at all. I failed to intervene sooner, and that is on me." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Mrs. Amara Cole showed the world that dignity isn't something wealth can purchase. It's something you carry, even when others try to strip it away. On behalf of this event and on behalf of myself, I apologize. That moment sealed Daniel's reputation as a man of integrity, and it further elevated Amara's story. Invitations poured in for her to speak at design schools, women's leadership summits, and inclusion panels. She accepted only a few, preferring to focus on her foundation. When asked by one reporter how she felt about Daniel's speech, she smiled softly. "He didn't defend me," she said. "He defended decency, and that's all I ever wanted." Weeks later, Amara returned to her quiet apartment and laid the now-repaired gown on her bed. She ran her fingers along the seam Evelyn had torn, the golden thread shimmering under the light. She hadn't mended it to hide the damage. She had highlighted the tear, stitching it with metallic gold in the Japanese kintsugi style, where broken things are repaired with beauty instead of disguise. She folded the gown carefully into a silk box and carried it to a small cemetery on the edge of town. The grass was damp from last night's rain. Her grandmother's headstone sat beneath an old oak tree, just as peaceful as she remembered. Amara knelt, brushing away the fallen leaves. "Hey, Nana," she whispered, smiling faintly. "You were right again." She opened the box and spread the repaired gown across the grass, the gold-threaded seam glinting in the sunlight. "Class isn't stitched in fabric," she said softly. "It's stitched in grace, just like you always told me." A light breeze lifted her curls, carrying her words through the quiet air. She closed her eyes, feeling a calmness settle over her heart. When she returned home that evening, she sat by her window overlooking the city skyline and opened her leather-bound journal, the same one she'd written in since the early days of her foundation. She took a deep breath and began to write. When grace meets cruelty, grace always wins, quietly. The world will always have Evelyns, but it will also have people who remember what dignity looks like, and that's enough. She paused, letting the ink dry. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, reflecting in the window beside her. For the first time in years, she felt completely at peace, not because justice had been loud, but because it had been fair, and somewhere, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice, gentle, proud, and certain, whispering back, "You didn't just mend a dress, Amara. You mended what people thought they could tear apart." In the months that followed, Amara's name became synonymous with resilience and reform in the world of fashion. But she didn't chase fame. She channeled the attention into purpose. Instead of accepting every interview or endorsement, she created something deeper, something that would outlive the viral headlines. She called it Threads of Respect. It began as a small mentorship program for young designers of color, artists who had ideas but no platform, creativity but no capital. Amara opened her foundation's doors to them, offering workspace, materials, and, most importantly, belief. "You don't need permission to belong," she told them. "You just need a voice and the courage to use it." Within a year, Threads of Respect grew into a national initiative. Students from marginalized communities applied from all over the country. Amara visited community colleges and high schools, searching for the next spark of brilliance, the next dream waiting for its first chance. She saw herself in every one of them, the girl who once served tables, stitching her own dreams in the quiet corners of a noisy world. Her grandmother's name became the foundation's heart. A mural of her, smiling in her Sunday hat, holding a spool of golden thread, was painted in the lobby of the foundation's headquarters. Beneath it, engraved on a bronze plaque, were her words, "Class isn't stitched in fabric, it's stitched in grace." Every visitor read it before stepping into the studio, a daily reminder that art and humility were never meant to be separate. Unbeknownst to many, Daniel Hart had continued supporting the foundation. He donated anonymously through a trust, ensuring Amara's programs had stable funding for years. When a journalist later asked him about his involvement, he simply replied, "Some debts are better repaid in silence." Amara never confirmed it publicly, but she knew. When new workshops opened in underfunded districts or scholarships appeared right when funds were running low, she smiled quietly and whispered, "Thank you, Daniel." Years passed, and Amara's influence stretched far beyond the borders of her city. Her designs began appearing in international exhibitions, admired for their fusion of elegance and cultural symbolism. Yet she stayed true to her roots. Every piece she created carried a story, a lesson, or a memory. Then came the moment that sealed her legacy. Paris Fashion Week. It was her debut collection, and the finale piece stunned the audience before it even reached the runway. As the lights dimmed, a single spotlight illuminated the model wearing the dress, the same one Evelyn had torn years ago. Now restored and transformed, the rip down the side gleamed with golden embroidery, each thread glistening like sunlight on silk. The crowd rose to its feet before the model even reached the end of the catwalk. By the time she turned, tears glistened in the eyes of more than a few spectators. The applause that followed wasn't just for beauty, it was for survival, for transformation, for truth reborn through art. The next morning, Vogue, Elle, and Harper's Bazaar shared the same headline. She turned humiliation into haute couture, Fashion critics hailed her as a visionary. Designers called her a symbol of evolution, proof that elegance wasn't defined by who wore the gown, but by what the gown had endured. Months later, Amara was invited to deliver the keynote speech at an international design summit in Milan. The auditorium was filled to capacity. Young designers, industry icons, and journalists all waiting for her words. Behind her, on a massive screen, an image appeared, her repaired gown glowing under soft light, the golden seam gleaming like a scar turned to jewelry. Below it, the caption read, "Grace wears no color." Amara looked at it for a moment, then turned to the audience. Her voice was calm, assured, but carried warmth that filled the hall. "I didn't build my career on what I designed," she began. "I built it on what tried to break me. That night I realized something. You can't control cruelty, but you can control what grows from it. You can let it tear you apart, or you can stitch yourself back together stronger." The audience listened in reverent silence. "My grandmother taught me that dignity doesn't make noise," she continued. "It simply endures, until the world finally notices. That's what this dress means. It isn't just fabric. It's a promise that no matter what color your skin is, or where you start, grace will always fit." A standing ovation followed, long and thunderous. Cameras flashed, capturing her against the backdrop of her creation, a woman who had taken the ugliest moment of her life and turned it into living art. And as she stepped off the stage, Amara Cole knew one thing with absolute certainty. What had once been a wound was now her masterpiece, and every stitch of gold was a reminder that grace, once tested, only shines brighter. They tore her dress thinking they could tear her dignity. But what they shredded was their own illusion of superiority. That night at the gala, a cruel act meant to humiliate became the spark that unveiled true class. Not in diamonds or status, but in grace. Amara never raised her voice, never demanded revenge. Instead, she stood tall in silence, letting the truth reveal itself one heartbeat at a time. And when it did, the world saw that strength stitched with humility can never be undone. In the end, a seamstress became a symbol, and silence became her victory. Respect isn't tailored to wealth or race. It's woven through empathy. True class never humiliates, it heals. What Evelyn tried to destroy became immortal, a reminder that the finest fabric in the world is still worthless without kindness. So, if this story reminded you that grace is stronger than prejudice, like, share, and subscribe. Because somewhere right now, another person is being judged by appearances, and your share might be the thread that changes how the world sees them. Sometimes one small act of empathy is all it takes to stitch humanity back together.